So thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Claire Scantleberry. I'm the Director General of Europa Bio, and we are really pleased to bring you today one of the events within our SME platform. And today we're having a good look at some of the healthcare biotech policies that are a priority, particularly in how they will impact small companies as well. So I will give you a brief introduction to the day. So the webinar will last up to about 60 minutes. It's being recorded so that you will be able to listen to it on YouTube as well afterwards. We strongly encourage everybody to ask questions or make comments using the chat and the Q&A function. So you can use the Q&A to ask questions directly and only to our presenters today, and you can use the chat function to put in messages that will be seen by everybody, and we will keep an eye on those and ask questions to the presenters at the end of the session. So we will have a really quick introduction to Europa Bio, because of course there is no such thing as a free dinner. And then we will move to our expert presenters, who will give you a short overview of healthcare policy priorities and how they are relevant to small companies. We will then have a short Q&A session where you are welcome to ask all of your questions, and we'll follow up with you for how you can stay involved in our future activities. So I'm going to give you a rapid overview of Europa Bio and what it does, and I've tried to squeeze everything into one slide here, so you can tell it's rather busy. So our overall mission is to really support the development of innovative science for both people and planet. And of course, this very strongly fits on the healthcare side, where we're looking at helping to support the development of a world-class ecosystem within Europe that delivers very strongly towards patients and represents the whole of the value chain in the development of novel technologies, from early stage research right through to when they reach the patients and can make an impact on their lives. And this sits these days also within the huge focus that we have on how the Green Deal is going to deliver and how we make our world more sustainable. So our industrial biotechnology side of Europa Bio really looks at how biotechnology is revolutionizing how we make products and the processes that we use to make products and create a really healthy environment that we all have to live in as citizens of the world. So our work is very diverse. We look at the whole ecosystem around building solid commercial biotechnology development that is impactful. And we want Europe to be very competitive within this. So we work very hard to ensure that Europe takes the lead in innovation development and that it's a strong actor in bringing benefits and products directly to citizens. Regulation, of course, is a really key part of this, and indeed policy. So we look to help shape landscapes that are extremely useful and beneficial to bringing technologies forward in a sort of healthy and sustainable way. And finally, we do this through a number of different activities within Europa Bio. We have our Healthcare Biotechnology Council, from whom you will hear today. We also have an Industrial Biotech Council that really brings together how we're producing the products and processes of tomorrow using biotechnology. Our National Associations Council reflects, obviously, as the name suggests, national associations, but also regional associations and sector-specific associations across Europe that really help to build the on-the-ground landscape into which companies deliver. And finally, you will know about the SME platform because you are in it today. We try and use this platform very much to support how small companies can be fully part of and fully informed about biotechnology progress. This year in particular, we have a really big year on our plate because it's our 25th anniversary, and we're really happy to say that we're building a program that celebrates amazing biotech innovation, both scientific and business-wise, over each of the last 25 years. So keep following us to find out what our members consider to be the breakthrough science and business from the last quarter of a century. And my last message to you before we move on is that this year, of course, we have a European Biotech Week every year that Europa Bio helps coordinate. That will be towards the end of September. And all organisations are welcome to take part in how we showcase and share biotechnology and the benefits of biotechnology to wider society. So before I leave you, I'm just going to have a really quick look at the type of people that we work with. This is our wonderful set of members, and it's a number that grows every day. So I can already see that there are two logos that I need to put on this slide. But you can see that we work with companies of all shapes and sizes. So from the smallest startup companies through to large-scale multinationals that sit within every country in the world. Our national associations, we have 19 of those represented across Europe, and they really help us also bring a lot of the underlying infrastructure and skills development into supporting a successful industry. So if you are not already a member of Europa Bio, you should be, and I will definitely follow up with everybody about this afterwards. So that will do for the sales pitch. I'm now going to hand over to Darren as our first presenter this afternoon, and I hope very much that you enjoy the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. To see if I have control of the slides. I believe I do. So yes, thank you. My name is Darren Kinsella. I'm a healthcare biotechnology manager at Europa Bio, working on a number of topics impacting the healthcare sector in Europe and innovation policy. And so today, my job is really to give you a quick overview of all of the key initiatives that we think are ongoing at the moment that are important for biotech and in Europe, but also globally as the industry and the sector is global in nature. But just to give you a quick overview of what it is that Europa Bio is, Claire already gave a pretty good overview, but she mentioned that we're divided between healthcare and industrial biotech. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on the healthcare side. So we're governed by what we call the Healthcare Biotechnology Council, which is 26 corporate members. They range from everything between SMEs to the larger companies. Some of them are based on one country, some of them have no products on the market yet, and then others are these more well-established multinationals. We also have 19 national associations, spanning from all the way from Ireland all the way to Bulgaria, which is great because we cover the whole continent. There are a couple of pieces of the puzzle missing in between, but I hope we'll get there eventually. Yes, and so I mean the objectives of our council really, as you see on the slide here in front of you, is to promote an innovative and dynamic biotech industry in Europe. I think that's an obvious one, but of course advocating free and open markets without barriers to competitiveness. This is also true for our industrial biotech sector as well. And then, of course, an open, transparent dialogue with stakeholders on the ethical, social, and economic aspects of biotech. And then finally, championing the socially responsible use of biotech. So we really try to position ourselves as not exactly thought leaders, but key constructive partners in all things biotech. The ethics, as we see here, socially responsible use, and really ensuring that we harness the potential of this technology for people and the planet. So then quickly moving on. And also, please don't forget to use the chat function. And there's also the Q&A section there as well. And there will be a chance to have a Q&A at the end. So just quickly introducing the flow of today's webinar. So I'm skipping ahead here for some reason. Apologies for that. I'm missing a slide, I believe. But so today, I'll just give you a quick overview, as I mentioned, of where we see the key points affecting biotech in the EU at the moment. And then we'll have three deep dive sessions. Firstly, I will talk about the ongoing evaluation of the Orphan Medicinal Products Regulation and its impact on SMEs, particularly involved in researching products or assets for rare diseases. This will be followed by my colleague Violetta, who will introduce herself shortly, who will discuss the European Union's IP Action Plan. And then finally, our healthcare director, Bernard Grimm, will give more of a comprehensive overview of the European Commission's recently published pharmaceutical strategy for Europe, which unfortunately we don't have enough time to go into specifically, but he will try identify and highlight the points which may be of interest for SMEs, both in terms of opportunities, but also risks. So moving on then. I'm sorry for the text-heavy slide here, but as you can see, and as I'm sure everybody on the call is aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has really put healthcare in the spotlight. And as we know, viruses are not confined by borders, and we really saw that when we were confronted with the really viral and cross-border nature of this pandemic and the healthcare challenges that it posed. I think this really catapulted the importance of the EU as a coordinating entity, but also it raised a lot of questions about what could we have done better. And so you can see that there were a lot of initiatives that had already been on the table from the European Commission and also pushed forward by the Parliament and the Council. But now we really started to see a bit of an acceleration in some elements. So, for example, on the European Centre for Disease Control and Prevention and the European Medicines Agency, the European Commission has proposed that the mandates of both of these agencies be strengthened. For example, on the ECDC side, they want to strengthen their ability to help the member states in terms of epidemiological surveillance, preparedness and response planning, options for risk management, deploying an EU health task force. These are suggestions on the table now. We'll see how it pans out eventually. And then on the EMA, they wanted to, we're currently discussing monitoring, mitigating the risk of shortages of medicines and devices. The EMA will hopefully have a better ability to provide scientific advice on medicines that have the ability to, the potential to treat, prevent, or diagnose diseases, as they're largely doing already, but will be strengthened. And then also, but to coordinate studies to monitor effectiveness and safety of vaccines and coordinating clinical trials. And then, of course, we see the cross-border healthcare directive under the spotlight as well, for obvious reasons, as I just mentioned. The purpose of this, so the cross-border healthcare directive is currently being evaluated. The evaluation will assess how the directive's objective to facilitate access to safe and high-quality medicines cross-border or for patients in one member state and another has been met, and to what extent it can be promoted in the future. And on this one, actually, a roadmap was already published, and there's a public consultation ongoing until the end of July, if you would like to contribute to that. We see the European Cancer Plan, which is focused on prevention, early detection, diagnosis, and improving quality of life, particularly for survivors. Then we have the general pharmaceutical legislation, which is under review as well. And I think we can all agree that the European Union has done a great job in introducing this legislation over the last, what must be nearly, 50 years. And I think the purpose of this review is also to ensure access to medicines, but also to foster innovation and improve security of supply, but really also to adapt to the new scientific and technological developments, of which there are many, and we'll probably get a chance to discuss that as well. There's a pilot project on the launch of products, which is aiming to kind of look at why some products are available in some countries, not in others. Structured dialogue on security of supply of medicines. This is largely self-explanatory. Other elements, this review on EU blood, cell, and tissue legislation. This is really just an update of the legislation in the direction of a more flexible alignment with technological and scientific developments as well. And also, I think one of the aims here was to tackle the re-emergence of communicable diseases and utilize the lessons learned from COVID-19. And the EU digital strategy, of course, is a very big one, which impacts all sectors, not only healthcare. But for example, in terms of healthcare, we see the recent publication of the regulation on artificial intelligence will impact our sector. We see the initiative to create the European Health Data Space, which will greatly, hopefully will greatly improve our ability to share data across border, but also to accelerate our ability to use that data then for research and scientific purposes. Of course, the details of that will really need to be hashed out, because of course we need patient trust, and patients really need to be the owners of their data, and they need to trust, let's say, researchers and the scientific community with handling that data, and sectors such as our own, including industry for that matter. When we look at the EU IP Action Plan, I will leave this to my colleague Violetta, who will speak about it a little bit later. We have the EU Industrial Strategy, which is actually linked to, as I mentioned, the European Digital Strategy, but it's this twin transition of green and digital. Both sides of, not to speak on behalf of the European Commission, but I believe it's the idea is that they're two sides of the one coin, so to speak. And then finally, I'd say Horizon. We have Horizon Europe, which I'm sure most people on the line are aware of. But the recent initiative from Horizon Europe to create an innovative health initiative, which is of course the public-private partnership, which aims to provide a collaborative platform for pre-competitive research and innovation, where you get different types of researchers, small companies, big companies, academia, etc., to work with researchers, patients, healthcare professionals, and regulators. So this is on the table now at the moment as well, which would be quite interesting. And not to mention, last but not least, actually, which I think I forgot to put on this slide. No, I didn't. I just forgot to mention this. The Health Emergency Response Authority, which has also been an initiative that was created by the recent pandemic. And then, so these are really all of the. I mean, it's one thing I could say is this is a large overview of what we see as critical or very important for the biotechnology sector at the moment. But there are so many initiatives ongoing that if we were to put them all on the slides, we wouldn't be able to get through this presentation within the hour. So, of course, if anybody wants to get in touch with us about something that's not here, feel free. We're more than happy to discuss all the other elements that are out there, of which there are many. And of course, as I continue, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. So then I think we move on to our 3 deep dives today. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be looking at the Orphan Medicinal Products legislation, which I will present, and then followed by the EU IP Action Plan, and then Bernard, our healthcare director, will finish off on the pharmaceutical strategy before we have time for a Q&A. So without further ado, allow me to begin. So let's see if my slide is coming up. Yes, so the purpose of the Orphan Medicinal Products Regulation was, which was introduced in the year 2000, I think it was adopted in 1999, came into force in 2000, was really to ensure that, to encourage the research and development of products for rare diseases, and to ensure that patients suffering from rare diseases have the same quality of treatments as any other patient. I think the legislation has been quite successful over the last 20 years. You know, as at Europa Bio, we tend to say that the development of a drug can take 10 to 15 years. And in those 20 years since the introduction of this legislation, we've seen over 200 products reach the market. And I think if we look at the number of products that have applied for orphan designation, which we'll discuss in a minute, but which is not even at the authorization stage, but rather a step before, where they say we think this drug is capable of treating patients with a rare disease. The number of those designations which have been granted is in the thousands. And out of those thousands, we have, as of 2021, over 200 on the market, which is a phenomenal feat, I would say, in 20 years, especially if we think that drug development takes such a long time. And also the difficulty, of course, is that when you're dealing with much smaller patient populations, the nature of the condition is also much less known, and also the patients are more difficult to find. But so in order for a medical product or a therapy to be considered an orphan drug, they really need to meet one of 3 criteria, which is prevalence, which is that they need to treat 5 or lower than the 10,000 people in the population, or they need to be able to demonstrate that there wouldn't have been a sufficient return on investment without the existence of the regulation. And then finally, we have this existing treatment or significant benefit, which is clinical superiority over an existing treatment that will greatly improve the quality of life or life expectancy of the patient. So then moving on, just actually, what is it that applying for orphan designation can actually bring to the developer of a medicine that feels that they're interested in applying for orphan designation, or that the product or therapy would be of benefit to patients with rare diseases? Is that some of it is largely regulatory. So we see that the European Medicines Agency will provide additional support to the developers in terms of protocol assistance, scientific advice as well. So we see here help for SMEs, particularly for SMEs. The fees are waived for SMEs who have applied for orphan designation as well. So they benefit as well from significant fee reductions. And then finally, the marketing exclusivity, which is 10 years of exclusivity for that indication for which you have developed your product, which is granted only once marketing authorization application has been submitted and been approved. So if you're first to market in that indication, you will benefit from 10 years of marketing exclusivity. This is, however, waivable if a competitor comes to the market in the same indication with a product that has clinical superiority. However, if another product is deemed to have no significant benefit, then you still benefit from your exclusivity on the market. So just this slide I thought would be interesting to present, because we look here at the number of applications for orphan medicinal products since the introduction of the legislation in the year 2000. So over the last 21 years, you can really see that the number of applications submitted has exploded. And then also the number of designations granted has fluctuated a little bit. We see a small drop here in 2017. It would be great to have a look if we could fill out this slide with the last 4 years, because it would look a little bit different. But you see here, at least until 2017, that it has been largely successful, which is great. But our job as Europa Bio now is to really try ensure that we continue to involve ourselves in the discussion to ensure that this trend continues. And some of you may be familiar that the current discussion is around that of the between 5,000 to 8,000 rare diseases which have been identified or estimated to exist, only around 5% of them are currently treatable. And so what we're really trying to do, and actually what the European Commission is trying to do, is really look at how we can incentivize research and development in those remaining 95% of rare diseases. And then another slide which I thought would be of interest, particularly as this is an SME policy webinar, is to look at how the number of applications for orphan drug designation and those orphan drug designations which have been granted in terms of SMEs. So we see in the year 2000, it was only 6% of the designations granted were actually for SMEs, and the vast majority were actually for the larger pharmaceutical industry. And we can see that figure has really turned upside down now when we look at 2017. We see that 55% of these products or products under development for rare diseases are being developed by SME entities. So that really emphasizes the importance of SMEs in the sector, but also the interest of SMEs in the sector. And I think one of the things is that the incentives awarded by the orphan drug regulation has really allowed SMEs to pitch for external funding, be it public or private, but it really helps in their pitch for seed funding and for public funding as well. And I think that's very clear here when we see the progression and the increased interest of SMEs in this field. So moving on then, it's not all sunny, unfortunately, because now, as of 2016, the European Council has requested that the European Commission conduct a review of the legislation to make sure it was fit for purpose and that it has met the objectives for which it was originally introduced. This can be good and bad from our side. We think it's great that, of course, legislation requires a fitness check every now and again. And perhaps if we look at the drug development timeline, we would, from our side, say that it has been largely successful. And if we look at the 10 to 15 years that we say it takes to develop a product, it's been really positive. Ideally, we would have more time to evaluate. But the council decided that it was time to have a look at this legislation, and this is largely where we are now. So then just quickly to discuss, what does this evaluation bring in terms of opportunity versus risks for the SME world? I think in terms of opportunity, well, let's start with risks. The risks are that there is the possibility that in Q2 2022, the European Commission will propose suggested changes to the legislation. As it's currently being discussed, there's an impact assessment ongoing. We're unsure what that will look like, but we understand, of course, that the European Commission is looking at changing things such as the marketing exclusivity. It's now 10 years. They could consider reducing that, or they could consider reducing it for certain products, such as repurposed products, or maintaining the exclusivity for breakthrough innovations, so-called breakthrough innovations. We also see there's a lot of discussions currently around defining unmet medical needs. And as Europa Bio, of course, we think that we shouldn't necessarily say one condition is more important than another, because every condition, unless it's cured, has some sort of unmet medical need. But this could really change if the European Commission, and of course I should not say the Commission, because it will have to go through Parliament and Council eventually. But if it's decided that this exclusivity, or indeed the incentives awarded, should change, I think currently the uncertainty around this may impact the predictability of your business model, for example. But as it stands now, nothing concrete is on the table, but this can change, as I said, in early 2022. So what Europa Bio is doing now is making sure that our sector's voice is very prominent in the discussion, and making sure that any suggested changes or any initiatives to make any changes are fully, at least that the voice of the biotech sector is heard when these changes are being considered. In terms of opportunity, well, I think the biggest opportunities are the ones that are currently awarded by the legislation. It could be, of course, that we see that any review could include more incentives for SMEs, for example. And of course, that's something that we would educate for, particularly as we see that the SMEs are the biggest sponsors in the sector at the moment. But that, of course, remains to be seen. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that the ultimate goal of this revision is to increase research and development in these in this 95% of rare conditions that do not currently have a treatment. So we can only be positive in this. Of course, we just need to make sure that the political entities that be get it right, so as not to negatively impact innovation. So I think we're in a good position now that I think the SME voice would be very helpful as well. And actually, this brings me to my next slide and final slide, I believe, which is SMEs having their say, because the European Commission is currently conducting an impact assessment, which if I'm not mistaken, timeline-wise, will be finalized by the end of the year. You have the opportunity to provide your own inputs into the public consultation, which is up until the 30th of July. Europa Bio will, of course, be inputting into this public consultation and submitting our positions to the Commission, but also to the parliamentarians and the member states within the Council, and really working with all of our partners, be it patient organizations, research foundations, to really make sure that we get this right. I think that's ultimately the point here, is that we need to make sure that we get it right. And then finally, so the end game of all of this will be then that the Commission is expected to publish a proposal in Q1 2022. And so our goal is to work with them to make sure that the proposal that's published is in the interest of patients, but also in the interest of science. So that's all from me. I haven't had a chance to look at the Q&A because I've been presenting, but now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Violetta to discuss the EU IP action plan. And in the meantime, I'll have a look at the Q&A, hoping that there's a long list of questions, of course. But so please go ahead, Violetta.
Thank you very much, Darren, and good afternoon from me as well. As you've already heard, my name is Violetta Georgieva. I work on the healthcare team of Europa Bio, a colleague of Darren on Bernard's team. And today, as Darren said, I will speak to you to the importance of intellectual property for fostering healthcare innovation in the EU, and also the rationale and objectives of the European Commission to adopt its action plan. And on the first slide, you see some of the key findings of the European Commission as they have been preparing the action plan. They released it in November of last year. And one of the issues, because they, of course, they adopted an action plan because they had issues to resolve. And one of those issues is that they found that only 9% of European SMEs file for IP protection. And there can be many reasons for that, they said. So first of all, they found that the large majority of SMEs lack knowledge about IP and what it could bring to their businesses. And those who file for IP, they still find the EU IP system costly, very costly actually, compared to other geographies, also very complex and difficult to navigate. And indeed, this is one of the main problems that they want to tackle with their new actions. But and maybe what I also want to mention here on this slide is how we have seen COVID-19 playing out in the IP arena, and I believe we can all agree that COVID-19 has shown us all, and I really mean all, the world has shown the world our dependence on critical technologies and innovations, and reminded us all of the importance of effective and robust IP rules and tools to secure a fast deployment of such technologies, because they had really saved the day for us all around the world locked into this pandemic. And so we can also see a clear link between the IP action plan and the pharmaceutical strategy of the European Commission. These have been two of the landmarks initiatives and strategies of the European Commission, not only for our sector, but also generally. And intellectual property rights and their role for securing a competitive and innovative industry in Europe has been clearly recognized in the pharmaceutical strategy, and is certainly an essential element of it. So now on the next slide, you will see a list of the key focus areas that the European Commission outlined in their action plan. I will not go through them because you get the slides anyway, but I'll really focus on the second one, because this is the one most relevant for you, the SMEs, and that's the objective and pure to incentivize the use and deployment of intellectual property, as I already alluded to in the first slide. So here I'll try to give you the main actions that the European Commission is rolling out as we speak, because they indeed started rolling them out as of January 2021. One of those actions, so for example, together with the EU Intellectual Property Office, the European Commission started offering financial support for IP vouchers for SMEs impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. And they're trying to help SMEs manage their IP portfolios. This scheme has a budget of 20 million euros for 1 year alone, and it will cover partial reimbursement for trademark and design registration, and for the so-called IP scan. This IP scan is basically a review of the intangible assets of the company by a professional, and it can also offer some initial advice on how to manage IP strategically, because that's the key issue. As you very well know, IP opens doors to a private investment in your businesses, and it could really be a very strategic asset that you could have. In parallel to this measure, the European Commission has introduced the tailor-made IP advice within the Horizon Europe program, which is aimed to assist innovative businesses at different stages of their research and innovation process. And with this, they will also explore possibilities to expand the IP advice to other EU research and investment programs. And one of these programs is the Invest EU, and I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that financial instrument. Then, on a third place, for a selected group of very innovative companies, the European Commission will also combine their strategic advice with financial support to foster the development of IP portfolios within the SME network, and more broadly, and again in cooperation with the EU IPO, the plan is to also provide a one-stop shop access to information and advice about intellectual property. And this is why the EU IPO will develop a platform which they call the European IP Information Center, which will offer access to all relevant information which you may find useful in the area of IP. And it would also provide these easy to use filing system for SMEs, because as I've mentioned, one of the issues has been that the EU system is very complex to navigate, and it certainly disincentivizes some very small companies, startups specifically, which do not have a lot of in-house resources to use IP in the first place. And then on my last slide, I will try to have a look or an overview really of the interplay between intellectual property, the COVID-19 crisis, and biotechnology, because there has been a lot of discussion in the public domain on this topic, as I'm sure you all have noticed. So first of all, I believe all of us in the sector, within the industry, are very proud to know that in a very, very short time frame, we have seen 950 R&D projects for vaccines, for treatments and diagnostics related to COVID. They have been launched within slightly more than a year now, and the large majority of the responsible people for bringing those wonderful innovations to the labs have been the SMEs. So 70% of all these projects have been undertaken by SMEs, which is I'm speaking at a global level, not only within the EU. So, and this has been a real success. Many of these projects will, of course, fail. You know that the success rate within our industry, the healthcare biotechnology, biopharmaceutical industry, is about 1 in 10 clinical trials. So out of this 950, we expect perhaps around 225 out of the 225 global projects for vaccines alone, we expect about 10% will eventually yield some successful products. And that really corresponds to the usual success rate or failure rate, as you want to look at it within our industry. But we have all been convinced, I believe, that this rapid and very broad response is a direct result of the global system of intellectual property rights, which has been incentivizing the industry not to all of a sudden coin all these wonderful solutions to COVID, because they have been in the labs and in preparation for years and years, as we know, with the most successful projects so far. And against this background, we have seen a very popular, I would say, discussion around waiving IP rights, and that discussion has been taking place for quite some time now within the framework of the World Trade Organization. It has been initiated by the governments of India and South Africa, and we're still in this discussion, so I would not go too much into the detail of that, but you know that some governments are asking the WTO to waive patents on the existing COVID-19 solutions and future ones. What I would like to certainly emphasize is that companies are working very hard, and they're working together, which has been also one of the greatest successes of our experience with COVID-19. We have seen more than 250 international partnerships and collaborations, and they haven't been only between private stakeholders, but also through public-private partnerships, and that has been an incredible achievement, I believe. So now, what is important to note is also that the current estimated that the existing efforts will result in about 11 billion COVID-19 vaccines being available in 2021 by the end of the year, and more will become available in 2022. And this shows that the industry has been successful and is certainly determined to make their products life-saving, in many cases, available over the world. And the key takeaway from my very short talk today to you is that IP has been really the foundation for achieving the goals of research and development and innovation and building all these numerous public-private partnerships. But it does not, unfortunately, solve any issues with these objectives that we all share. And I think I'll finish here. I'll be looking forward to your questions, and I'll pass over to Bernard now.
Thank you, Violetta. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Bernard Grimm, and I'm the Healthcare Director here at Europa Bio. So I will move to the next slide. I will try to cover in a few minutes, and it's going to be certainly a challenge to do it just in a few minutes, what is the intention of the pharmaceutical legislation and how Europa Bio is working To do this, I'm proposing just to look at some of the key topics in this pharmaceutical legislation revision, and I will try to really for this session to emphasize what could be the impact for the SMEs, because I believe this is where the value of the discussion can be there. So just to highlight again what the key objective of the pharmaceutical legislation revision is. It's to ensure access to affordable medicines for patients, and particularly, in unmet needs. Clearly, science has made a lot of progress over the last years, particularly in the healthcare arena. We've seen a lot of treatment, particularly with the immuno-oncology treatment that have become accessible. But here too, what the Commission and the intention is really to look at some unmet need and see how innovation can be accelerated in this area. It's also to enable innovation and the development of high quality, safe and effective medicines, but also looking at the digital revolution and the new science around digital and how the legislation can adapt to those new technologies. One topic has surfaced even more lately, which is the security of supply. I think you have followed the discussion around COVID-19 and the supply of critical medicines. That has come to the agenda also. And one other objective, which is to reduce the regulatory burden and to provide a flexible regulatory framework. Those are the key objectives that the legislation is going after. In terms of timelines, it's basically, the publication of the roadmap has happened last quarter. And basically, we are looking at an adoption of the Commission proposal by end of 22. So far, we are in the timelines that have been set. But given, the extent and the scope of this revision of the legislation and the number of initiatives that have been launched, I will come to that. It's quite, evident that 22 quarter 4 is going to be extremely tight in terms of agenda if we want to cover all the topics included in that. So let me start maybe, and don't look at this crowded slide, on all the lines. What I'm trying to do is just to highlight what are the opportunities we see at Europa Bio, which are highlighted in green, and also maybe the risks that we see, and I'm highlighting some of them. I cannot spend the time on each of them, but I think what the Commission and the institution are looking for is really to bring a very strong ecosystem in Europe, and it believes that this ecosystem is an important crossroad, which we believe too, given the advancement of science and digital technology that have occurred. But what is nice to see is that the strategy, the pharmaceutical strategy as such, is really starting from a strong foundation. This is recognized that many progress have been made in Europe. It's emphasizing also the role of the EMA. You might have known that some of the objective, and I will not have time to go there, is also to increase the role of the EMA and to look at how in the future a BARDA Europe agency can be created, which is called HERA, and also looking at the role of the ECDC. These are very good starting points. And in the starting roadmap, the emerging biopharmaceutical companies, and here we're speaking of SME, particularly in Europe, account for basically 70% of the research pipeline. And I think this is a key acknowledgement of the importance of SME in our field, on which we can build, obviously. But clearly, there is also a risk that is highlighted and has been one of the main trigger points over the years of the pharma legislation. It's also that, the access to those new products, vaccines, personalized therapies, or advanced therapy, where Europa Bio is extremely active. This has contributed to a lot of changes and innovation, but often they are considered as unaffordable and unavailable in all the countries. And so this revision wants to address this one way or another. And obviously, by doing this, there are always risks when you change an ecosystem that it can be detrimental to the strength of your ecosystem. So what is in for the SME? I think, the recognition that the SME are at the heart of the innovation, I think is a very good starting point. But again, Europa Bio is going to be extremely vigilant to make sure that whatever good ideas come are strengthening this ecosystem in the future and not weakening it. Darren was just alluding to the OMP legislation. It's part of the pharmaceutical strategy. Technically, it's separate, but it's part of what wants the institution wants to address. We believe it's extremely important that when you change, incentives in those systems, you need to make sure that those changes will continue to attract investors under a revised legislation. And that's where we're going to come with our ideas and try to represent SMEs as much as possible. The next piece, which I think is important, is also the acknowledgement that the digital transformation is key. And, particularly in health, data is value for the future. Europa Bio is standing, for breakthrough innovation. What we want to bring is really breakthrough therapies in the future, medicines for new therapies. To do this, I think we need to harvest, the revolution, the digital revolution, and data is on the center of that. We didn't spend too much time in the introduction of the different initiatives, but that is one we're looking at too. So many opportunities, as you can see, from a legislative point of view for the SMEs on that. The other piece is looking at, how you can deliver innovation to patients and how do you fulfill the unmet medical needs that are still important, and how you fulfill that to ensure accessibility and affordability. On the positive side, again, what I want to highlight is the increased cooperation in scientific advice and the convergence of unmet medical need to facilitate the design of critical clinical trials and generation of evidence and assessment. I think this is particularly important for SMEs, and I will come back to that a little bit later. And also, the priority scheme, which is called PRIME, to provide the support to accelerate product development. This is certainly the most positive piece where we can work and come with our ideas at Europa Bio. On the other side, you have also some discussion about how to define unmet needs. And that can really create, unbalances when it comes to incentives in the future, where we're going to be extremely vigilant, particularly when, the understanding of the biotech ecosystem continuum is not totally there. And there are also initiatives. There can be opportunities, but today we see many risks because it can create additional hurdles for market access for SMEs in particular. It's, new approaches on joint pricing and reimbursement negotiation, and new ways to share information among the member states in the access process. So to us, the impact for SMEs is really a good potential for better regulation, better access to scientific advice and accelerated pathway, and also potentially, and we're advocating for this, for dynamic assessment, including better use of data, especially with the new technology, but also real-world evidence. But we're looking also at the new modulation of incentives that could be applied and could destabilize the current framework and the competitive rules that we stand for. We believe, the best engine for innovation is competition, and as an association at Europa Bio, we want to support this as much as possible. I'm looking at the time, and I will accelerate a little bit. There is other pieces that I will make it short, but there is high risk also that we come with new hurdles. You have certainly followed the discussion on the HTA at European level, where we're looking at HTA integration in the regulatory assessment. This file has been complicated, but there is also this idea floating around to create additional conditions to launch innovative products in the EU, with potentially, limited launches in the future, given new access conditions. And one of the ideas that is floating around, which we believe is not a good idea, which would be to oblige, all smaller companies to market their medicines in all countries. We know that from the resources from SMEs, this is extremely complex, and also from the delivery system of the advanced therapies, if we take this example, that this will not take place. So we were extremely vigilant to make sure that the access conditions in the future will not be made more complicated based on, good common will, but not necessarily the right regulation to make it happen. On the other pieces, I will go fast because we are getting close. There is this idea that could impact SME vitally in their business model. It's the potential risk to define value based on the cost approach, and basically, to relate the value of the new medicines to basically the research and development cost requirement, which could also create additional administrative burden for the SME to report their R&D costs. And that could obviously change market condition quite significantly, particularly if you touch on market exclusivity. So on that one, Europa Bio is going to be extremely vigilant because we want SME obviously to have access to the market in the best conditions. And we believe that the value of new innovative drugs must be assessed on the value that those drugs have for society and not on the cost, because the model cannot be that the more you fail, the more cost you have, the more costly the medicines are. They need to be related to the value they bring to society. On the, I'm going to move further for the sake of time. There is also, and technically, you must know that the pharmaceutical strategy is part of the industrial strategy, which gives a very nice focus on R&D healthcare. And you know that Europa Bio is participating to this innovative health initiative to support SMEs, because IMI might not have supported SMEs in, public-private partnership as much as we wanted. So we are looking at that. There are many other initiatives. We will not have time to look at those to support SME when it comes to bringing innovation. And there is also a potential stronger access to data infrastructure across the member states, which I think would be of great value, particularly for SMEs in native fields. I will just move on a little bit further. Can you see my slides? One of the last pieces is related to, again, to innovation and digital transformation. I think the new legislation is also a nice opportunity to look for a better framework for clinical trials, and specifically around innovative clinical trials, and particularly in fields where data is extremely scarce and where you can build data along the development cycle of a product. There are also new incentives in the area of repurposing. You've seen what it meant in the crisis of COVID-19. There can be new opportunities for SME, and particularly, advocating for an EMA regulatory framework that supports SMEs. And the last point I'm going to make there is around the EMA fees. It's a discussion that will be taking place also in the pharmaceutical strategy, because it's very important that the European Medicines Agency has the right resources and infrastructure in terms of fee structure in order to make it happen. And here too, Europa Bio thinks it's a great opportunity also to advocate and make sure that, the fees for SME reflect, the critical priority and the specific needs of SMEs. On my final part, I'm just trying to scroll through my slides. I will just go to the conclusion. So the opportunity in general for our sector is to make sure that this sector keeps on being strategic for the EU in terms of global trade, what we have already shown, that the SME are the engine of innovation, and they should be particularly nurtured in all the topics we just looked at. We are advocating for enhanced regulatory cooperation and convergence, and making sure that international standards are the same around the world, and that Europe is in the forefront on those discussions, and making sure that the regulatory environment for SME is conducive for innovation and competitiveness. And just a last piece of information for you is that we have created what we call the biopharmaceutical strategy group. And on that one, I will not go into the detail. It's a structure we have created within the Healthcare Council, where we're going to try to address some of the key initiatives in the pharmaceutical strategy. There are basically 14 different initiatives. But here is a call for having your SME perspective. And if you're interested to participate in this discussion, do not hesitate to contact us at the Healthcare Council. We will be more than ready to work with you so that you have a good representation of the SME points in this regard. And I stop here and we can move quickly to the Q&A session. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. So I think I will be moderating this Q&A session. So I'm very happy to see that there are a couple of questions in both the Q&A box and the chat. I think so. The first question I see is, will the slides be available after the webinar? And the answer is yes. The slides will be available, and also the recording will be on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Looking to our comms colleagues, but I think it will be. And then I see a question here as well, which is the OMP landscape seems like a really great way for SMEs to gain much greater maturity with their products. Do you see this continuing? So I believe that's a question for myself. So where to begin? I think, yes, I think we can see from the slide I presented during my presentation, we showed that SMEs went from 6% of designations from when the legislation was introduced to 55% by 2017. I think that's pretty indicative or reflective of how the legislation has been of benefit to SMEs. I think that we see that the protocol assistance and scientific advice can be key, as many SMEs might have the science, but not necessarily the regulatory know-how or prior experience with regulatory submissions. So I think this is really helpful. Also, the fee reduction. I think when we look at SMEs and their finances, when they often have little or no revenue while developing their products, which can be an expensive undertaking. I think the fee reduction is very important. And then finally, of course, the orphan drug designation in itself, even if you don't get your product past the hurdle for authorization, I think designation in itself is it really allows SMEs to show potential investors that they have a viable product on their hands, and that if it's successful, this product can then benefit from 10 years of exclusivity. You also see in terms of maturity, I think if you look at some countries, they have specific access pathways or HTA processes for orphan medicinal products. And I think Germany is one that's always often cited as a really good example of this, is where orphan products avail of almost immediate access upon approval by the EMA. So, I mean, of course, the access environment is different in each country, but you see that different countries tend to treat orphan medicinal products differently or more favorably in terms of access negotiations. Of course, it differs by country, but Germany is a great example. And then whether I see this continuing, well, I mean, I think whether this momentum and this trend of the increased number of orphan designations and products, I think whether this continues will depend on whether we get the revision of the legislation correct. I think we need to ensure that any changes do not negatively impact this momentum that we're witnessing, and that while we are trying to address the 95% of remaining conditions, that we don't negatively impact our ability or the success which we've already achieved. I think that, I hope that answers the question, but of course, I'll provide my email address a little bit later if anyone has any follow-up questions. So then I see another question. I think this is for Violetta because I see IP involved. What is your opinion on the current global storm on the IP waiver? It's hard to get an accurate picture of what is the real driver behind this call through media reports. What do you think will be the outcome?
Thank you, Darren, and thank you also for the question. So the global storm on IP, I think it was very much expected. My personal opinion, I was very unsurprised, I believe, because it's not the first time governments around the world are trying to solve issues with access with tweaking IP. But as I said, we're very much convinced, and we're trying to explain this to all stakeholders, that at the root causes for any issues with access, first of all, they're multifactorial, and they have much more to do with the ways we manufacture and the ways we run trade around the globe today. So again, not related to IP at all, we believe. And then the next part of the question, I believe, is what's, in my opinion, will be the outcome of this discussion. So we, as you see, the discussion is very much ongoing. Governments around the world are taking positions. The EU has recently indicated that they are not ready yet, at least, to go to accepting, to move on to accept a waiver on IP. They have also indicated they want to work on compulsory licensing, which for us in the industry is also a watch out, because we don't think compulsory licensing will address challenges with access, again for the same reasons that I've mentioned. It will require a lot of time to explain, but also as a citizen, I find it very difficult to believe that one of the issues that IP safeguards for us, and this is precisely the quality and safety of the products it protects, will be somehow compromised by the EU, as we are a front runner in quality, in securing quality and safety of all our products, and especially in the pharmaceutical sector. So I believe eventually we will not have a waiver on IP. We'll have some kind of another solution, and that remains to be seen. And we'll be very much involved in this discussion as Europe Bio and as the global biotechnology industry for sure.
Thanks, Violetta. And I see that there's one final question. I think, Bernard, this falls, I can answer it as well, of course, but I think you're better placed too, which is, do you have some insights or information about the future HERA agency around, for example, timeline and organization?
No, the HERA agency is on the discussion, and it should be addressed at the beginning of next year. I think, you know, today the main item discussion is how are we going to create this agency? What will be the scope? What will be the responsibility? And we have already contributed to some ideas there. We believe at Europa Bio that, you know, the agency needs to have the means of what it intends to do, which is really to support, you know, the ecosystem when an emergency happens. And it could address also issues like AMRs in the future. But to do this, you know, the agency needs to be strong, needs to be financially well sorted out. If you look at what was the success at BARDA for the COVID-19 pandemic, it was because decisions were taken extremely quickly in terms of investment, and that there was a spirit of taking risk, and a lot of money was put on the table by the Trump administration, believe it or not, that we came, you know, to some of those acceleration we have seen for COVID-19. And we must say it's the whole world that has benefited from those American investments. And this is a clear message for the agency in Europe, which means also that you're going to have to carve out, you know, the responsibility of the new agency and really think how it's going to work with the current structure that exists to support scientific development, because I think there shouldn't be too many overlaps, and the objective of the agency should be very clear. So I think it's going to be a very good discussion, but it can be only positive if it's carved out in such a way that it will support our industry for the long term, and that it will be flexible and quick enough to take decisions. So that's our position at Europa Bio. And I think the discussion will happen quite quickly because, you know, the learnings of COVID-19 have shown that we need to be ready for the next pandemic. And I'm sure this is one of the priority. I didn't cover it on the pharmaceutical point because it was too short for me. But I'm pretty sure that you're going to see acceleration on that topic in the future.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And just 2 minutes over time, so actually we're doing pretty well for time, actually. I guess then that leads us to our final slide, which is, of course, please do feel free to make sure that everybody gets in touch. Sign up to our weekly newsletter if you want to see what we're doing on a weekly basis, and where you can find our positions and key biotech updates, not just from the healthcare side, but also from our colleagues on the industrial biotechnology sector. You can find us everywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, which is new, by the way, so I hope that's going well. I'm not very Instagram savvy, but I'll get there. And on Facebook as well, of course. And then finally, if anybody has any final questions or would like to follow up with us, please do feel free to get in touch. You can see our email addresses on the screen, but of course we'll send around our contact details to everybody who registered following the webinar. But please do feel free to get in touch because, you know, it's a topic that we like talking about, so as you can see. But so on that note, then, thank you to everybody, and we hope to get in touch with some of you in the future.